Hello, my name is Megan Carrion, and this is my presentation on the essential elements of reading instruction. So today we will be covering the 6 components of reading: oral language, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Throughout this presentation, we will go over definitions of each of these components, as well as 3 assessment types that you can use within your classroom, and 3 evidence-based strategies. So our first component is oral language, and oral language encompasses how spoken words sound and how we connect them to meaning and understanding. So for example, noises versus words. When children are very small, about 1 year, we have a lot of babbling, we have them making noises, but they don't have any connection to language or to an understanding of something, wherein they transition to creating words. Like, for example, making the sound ma, ma, and it not connecting to anything, to saying mama, where they know that they're asking for their mom. And it also encompasses listening, because listening is how they develop this oral language. And oral language will mostly be developed between 12 and 18 months. So the first assessment is the Student Oral Language Observation Matrix. It is a formal assessment, and essentially the student will be observed by the teacher doing formal or informal language tasks, like an oral presentation or group work. So a teacher can assign something within the classroom and then do this in attachment to it. I have the score sheet presented here on the left. The teacher just marks off which one feels most appropriate, and then this test can be done every month, and then you can compare the scores by area. Our second assessment is the OWLS, which is the Oral and Written Language Scales. This is a formal assessment, and the teacher administers this test with a student one-on-one. You'll note as we go through the presentation that most of these assessments will be one-on-one, just because it gives more focus to the student. And so within this test, the teacher then asks questions to the students, and they respond by speaking, pointing, or writing their response. And the scores are age-based and grade-based within percentile rankings, and we monitor progress for this one with those percentile ranks and the descriptive categories. Our third assessment is letter sound recognition. This one is more informal. On the right, I have an example of what it would look like within your classroom. So it's also a one-on-one. So the teacher would show a card like this, like let's say this capital A here, and they would ask the student its name. The child would then say ah, and it would be marked correct. And you would go down through the chart with each letter and each of their sounds. One thing to note, though, is when doing this assessment, you have to avoid going adding an at the end of the letters. So p. So instead of saying p, where you add that at the end, it would be like p. And just making sure that you have a clarity of sound when presenting this to your students, and making sure that they're not making that extra sound also. And so you would obviously just compare it out of 24 for knowing each of the letter sounds, and you could check progress with this in the beginning, middle, and end of year, or just whenever you feel that you want to check on how a student is doing. That's the benefit of informal assessments. They can be used a little more flexibly. So now our first evidence-based strategy is the peer method. So within the peer method, we have the teacher prompting the child to comment on a book. Over here we have the crowd strategies, which is different types of prompts and questions that you can ask the student. Then the teacher evaluates the response and expands by rephrasing and adding information and then repeating the prompt. So very self-explanatory how it works. You're very much just trying to have conversations about books that expand thinking about it, but also expand the student's oral language. The crowd chart can be sent home to parents so that when they read books with their children at home, they can also ask questions like this to encourage them to have have a more involved relationship with the language that they're showing their child. Our other evidence-based strategy is the act it out. I've done this one in my classroom and I really enjoy it. It's when a teacher reads a story and then has the students act out what is being read. This I find works really good with fairy tales or with stories that students were already familiar with, so they already had a notion of what was going on, and this helps to reinforce the language that they had already heard before. So kind of like an addition to it. Parents can very easily do this activity at home. It's a game, and it can be very entertaining for the child while also including new language and showing different structures for the way that language can be used. The third evidence-based strategy are listening games. So just like the Act It Out can be a game, these are also other games that can be very helpful. Games like I Spy, Red Light, Green Light encourage students to listen and to then respond with meaning. And then following directions obviously is incorporated in this. To increase the use of language, you can have a student be in charge of the games, so then they have to use their language to direct their fellow students, and this encourages communication between them in a formal setting. These games can obviously be played at home, just like the Act It Out from previously, and teachers can ask parents to encourage their children to lead the game, and for them obviously to be conversing the whole time that they're playing. So next we have phonological awareness, which is being aware of the spoken parts of words and sentences and being able to manipulate them. So for example, we have rhyming, we have alliteration, syllable identification, blending, and segmenting. And this will mostly be taught during kindergarten and first grade. This is a foundational skill that leads into all the rest. So our first assessment is the phonological awareness screening test. The PAST. This is a formal assessment. Within this one, the teacher provides a set of fast-paced questions, and the student has to remove a portion of the word. So it's a lot of phoneme manipulation that's involved with this. And as they go up, the manipulation gets more and more complicated. So we could start with maybe deleting the first letter of the word cat and just having at, and then moving on to blending it, so saying the word scat. For scoring, teacher just marks if the answer is correct and if it was automatic. It being automatic means that the student was able to respond within about 2 seconds or within 2 counts of 1 1000, 2 1000. Because we want the student to be able to respond quickly. If they think about it and then respond, that's also fine, but we want them to be able to do it automatically. And then progress is monitored with comparing against the average approximate development levels. I have those included on the right. Our second assessment is a rhyming assessment. This one is informal, and this one, and as you can see, I have an example of what it would look like on the right. The teacher provides a set of cards with rhyming words and then holds up different pairs and asks students if they rhyme or not. So for example, the teacher could hold up bridge and fridge, and the students would reply whether it rhymed. And then the teacher would hold up maybe bridge and mouse, and the students would say no. This one can also be done one-on-one or within a big group, just to have a general understanding of how the class is doing. It's scored obviously out of the correct number of the total that are presented, and this progress is monitored throughout the school year, and you just compare it against their previous scores. And this one is best for kindergarten through first grade. Our third assessment is syllable segmentation. This is also an informal assessment type. This is where a teacher presents a list of words and goes one by one and asks the students to find the 2 word parts. So for example, we have teach, acorn, sunshine. And then of course we score them just based on how many they got correct out of the total. And this one is best done about 3 times a year in kindergarten, because we really want them to be able to separate these phonemes and understand how to separate them. So our first evidence-based strategy that we have is the hand mirror technique, where a teacher will model the proper mouth shapes for different sounds. We can have vowel charts that also have pictures of the mouth shape, but modeling it is more effective because it is a movement that the students are doing. Students then get given hand mirrors and they copy the movement that the teacher has made with their mouths. This allows them to self-check in the mirrors, and it's just a good way for that minute movement to, be focused on. This is very easy to recreate at home. You can send a mouth shape chart home for the parents so that they understand, as what their childs are up to, and also so that they can also properly model the shapes. It's very important to keep parents abreast of what you're teaching within the classroom, and giving them material, especially with what you're teaching, can be very helpful. Another evidence-based strategy is syllable manipulatives. You get different letters on these blocks. You can also do flashcards, or you can do like literal big letter blocks. You split the words up into syllables with the blocks. So the student will point out each syllable. So for example, we have b, all, and k, at. Yes, and as you do it, you can progress by removing or replacing syllables. So for example, you could bring the C over to ball and replace it and make the word call. And you want the student to be able to do this on their own. You would model it first, obviously, but then afterward, you can have the student play around with the letters and be, oh, if we move this T over to the BA from ball, that makes bat. Having them have a strong awareness of moving letters can create new words is the ultimate goal. We can send tokens home for home learning options with a sight word list to practice. I've also seen schools where each student has a baggie of these kind of blocks that they take home, and they practice that through home learning. Our third evidence-based strategy is rhyme groups. So a teacher can make a chart like the one here on the right with different rhyme groups, and then holds up rhyming cards that fit into these groups. So then, for example, we have the family at. So hat would go within that family, so we would put that card under the at chart, and also cat would go under that one, and then students would do this. And then at the end, the teacher and the students would verbally review each one with encouraging listening, so making sure that it sounds right. One way to do this in home learning is parents can point out rhyme words in songs or in books, and then the rhyme groups being covered for that week can also be used as a basis. So for example, if the rhyme family is at, then when the child goes home, they can be asked to bring something that exists within that at family. So they can bring a cat toy, they can bring a hat that's in their closet, they can bring a baseball bat, just to further encourage that connection between the item and the language and how they connect. Next, we have phonics, which is the understanding that the sounds in spoken language are represented by letters with predictable relationships. So for example, the letter B means the sound b, b. And also the letter S and H put together, making the sound sh. So this is a skill that is mostly developed during kindergarten, and is a predecessor to starting to read. So our first assessment is a phonics element assessment. This is an informal assessment. So we have our sample sheet on the left. A teacher can ask the student what sound a letter makes initially, so this can be like the first level of the assessment. And then later on, once they have a better understanding, they can be asked what to add to the word to give it a different sound. And it can be either based on letter blends or concepts that you have been working on, so like pr or sp, that mixing of words and digraphs. So within each chart, a teacher can just take notes and compare them with their previous scores, and also can compare it with their peer scores, just to see generally how the class is doing, but then also if certain students are struggling with certain mouth sounds like the S sound or the R sound, then that can be targeted within small groups, or if the whole class is having trouble, then that can be re-reviewed. And then the progress can be monitored several times throughout the year once more informal assessments are very simple and flexible, so it's easier to just check in with these. Our second assessment is the Basics Phonics Skills Test 3. This is technically an informal test. I know the sheet next to it makes it look like it would be more formal, but it is self-described as informal. Within it, teachers have a set of cards with different letters and words. If you look at the chart on the right, you will see over here the different consonant sounds that we have listed, the short vowel sounds, and then also reading words with phonic patterns. So the student will be asked to represent the sounds correctly themselves, so being able to say and then connecting that and m are related. Same thing with the vowels, and then the words also being read. So scores are in percentages of correct versus total, and then any portion that is under 80% needs to be addressed. And then this progress can be monitored throughout kindergarten and second grade. At the bottom here, you can see the benchmark for what percentage they want students to be at and correct out of all the totals. So for first grade, we have 60, in second grade 75, and in third grade 81. So they won't get it perfect the first time around, students never do, but that's a good way to know if you are on benchmark or not. Assessment 3 is the Bracken Basic Concept Scale, and this is the expressive version. So this one is a formal assessment, and this one is another one-on-one assessment, and the teacher asks them questions based on images that are provided within this booklet. And there is different portions, but the one that we would focus on for phonics is the one on letters and sounds. The score is based on the number of correct answers and also their confidence interval, which we talked about a little bit before, how quickly the student answers and whether it's automatic or not. And then progress is monitored by comparing them against state standards, and this one can be administered 3 times a year just to have a good data set to compare their progress with. On the left, you can see what the score summary would look like, and in the subtests, they have colors, letters, numbers counting, sizes and comparisons, and shapes, but the second one, letters, is what we would really be focusing on when checking within phonics, and it also gives you a mastery percentage, which I found very convenient. So it lets you know which ones you have to work on more with the student. So for our evidence-based strategies, the first one is the bodily gesture sound match. So in this one, a teacher models a body movement that matches a sound, like for example, putting your hand on top of your head for the sound ah, and then the students copy. Eventually, you set up different movements for different sounds, and that will help the student connect the sound to a bodily movement and also a mouth movement. So, home learning can be achieved by having parents ask students to do the body movements for them, or for a list of sight words maybe that you've sent home. Since it's just hand movements, these can be done in the car, these can be just done in casual conversation. We just really want parents asking after students to show them the skills that they've developed in class to reinforce them. Our second evidence-based strategy is the touch and say method. So with this one, you would need a book or maybe a set of words, like the example we have here on the left, and the teacher will model touching each syllable and saying out loud the read word. So for example, we have ant here. So she'd say ant. It goes all together. Next we have apple, so it would be apple. So students would use that strategy to read the words. They can be put in groups. and they could do it together. Then eventually we would want the students to read the word by themselves, and then being able to read the word without having to use the touch and stay method. So it's a ramping up. And then parents can use these strategies when doing at-home reading with their child, when they're trying to decode a word, or it can be done with words that the student already recognizes, so kind of has recognition for it, and to reinforce the skill of stopping and making sure that they're saying the syllables and that they can recognize each of them. Our third evidence-based strategy is the paddle pop method. In this one, like as shown on the right, the teacher has popsicle sticks with letter clusters on them, and when the teacher reads a word, if the student hears the letter cluster, then they hold up the stick with the letter cluster on it. So for example, for the letter cluster sh, the teacher can say chair, and the students wouldn't hold up the popsicle stick. But then when she says shark, then they would hold it up. You can start off by just only having one popsicle stick, and then building up to holding up multiple ones for different words. So at first it would just be sh sounds, and whether you can recognize that, then you could do 2 and 3. This is also a good way to slowly build up on the skills and making the activity more challenging for students as you progress. These paddles are really good for home learning as well, because they can just be sent home, and then students can play with their parents while their parents maybe talk about their day, or maybe while their parent reads a book to them. So next we are going to fluency, which is reading accurately, quickly, and with expression, and well enough to understand what is being read. One word that it's going to come up a lot within this section is prosody, which is reading with expression. So, for example, for fluency, we want the words to go all together without pauses in them. So, we have the sentence, I like to go to the park, versus I like to go to the park. We want to hear not only that they can read the words quickly, but also that they can understand them, and while reading them, express the proper emotion or the proper prosody that is required within that. And then fluency will be mostly developed during kindergarten to 3rd grade. It's very important to have fluency as a very strong skill by 3rd grade, which is when the switch from learning to read to reading to learn happens. And students who have low fluency skills can get very discouraged when this transition happens. And it's very important that they have these fluency skills so that they can focus on reading comprehension instead of struggling through decoding words. So our first assessment is a formal, and it's the 4-level scale. For this one, a teacher will listen to the student read aloud and scores the student based on the levels described in the scale. And it's based on a 1 through 4 level from non-fluent to fluent. And then progress for this can be monitored semi-frequently until level 4 is reached. This one is also very good for ELLs. It sort of matches the levels that they go through when they're going through their English language learning, but obviously we would go a little bit slower with ELLs, especially since they're still learning the language. So our second assessment is the words correct per minute. This is a formal assessment, and for this one, students read for 1 minute from an unpracticed test. So this is a text that they haven't read before. It can be picked from a book, or it can be picked from a set of texts. So as the student reads it, the teacher marks the errors. So they have their own copy and they mark what they've gotten wrong. This includes omissions, mispronunciations, and substitutions. So on the right hand, I have the different score levels and what they should be per grade level. And that's how we check their progress, whether they're at an appropriate level according to oral fluency reading norms at each interval. So for our third assessment, we have the classroom fluency chart. This one is informal. It's kind of like assessment 2, but this one is just a essentially within a portfolio that a teacher has for each student, where she has them read aloud a new passage and make notes of any recognition errors, prosody, and the rate that they're reading in. So it's essentially a faster version of the second assessment. And within this, teachers can highlight any aspects that need extra practice by the student, but right in the moment, without having to take that extra time to take that longer formal test. And then teachers can monitor progress by looking back on previous notes within the student's portfolio and seeing any aspects that they need to work on. So for our evidence-based strategy, we have reader's theater. I've done this in a couple of my classrooms, and I find that it's really helpful because students are given lines for a play that they either memorize or they can read aloud from a paper, depending on the age group. And students can also practice their lines with their peers and then perform them. So when they practice with their peers, they can get direct feedback from them, and it can also help with them understanding the emotions that are behind words, once more helping with prosody. And one way to include this in home learning is students can practice reading their lines aloud at home, or they can put their own pre-written performances on for their parents. Another evidence-based strategy is sustained silent reading. So students are given a set period of time to read silently, and it will be with a book that they have chosen and a topic that they're interested in. This is a self-paced practice. This has been criticized before because there's more of a push for direct instruction, but this is how we create a love of reading within students. And if they have time for themselves to be able to read without extra stressors, this allows for them to work on their fluency. And that's why it's also so important that it be a book that they have chosen and with a topic that they enjoy, so that they're motivated to want to learn more and to want to read it. This one is obviously very easily translated into home learning because parents can have silent reading time, just sustained silent reading times within their child's schedule, or within the bedtime schedule. I know a lot of parents who, in their car, when they're driving to and from school, that is their set of sustained silent reading time. So they just keep a bunch of books in their back seat, and it's a very calm set time for the student to be able to read. So our third evidence-based strategy is partner reading. So students get paired up, and there is different ways to do this, but you can either have a more fluent reader paired with a less fluent reader, or you can have two equal-leveled readers paired together. The goal with a more fluent reader and a less fluent reader is for the more fluent reader to model fluency to the less fluent reader, and then for the equal-leveled readers is for them just to work together. So within it, one student reads a passage, and then the other student reads the passage again. So the equal-leveled readers can give each other feedback, and since they're at similar levels, if one's just a little bit behind, they can match each other. With the more fluent reader, they can read first, and then the less fluent reader can then model what that student has done. And obviously they give each other help and feedback until both of them can read it fluently. This is great to do in small groups. You can have the teacher walking around, checking in on groups, maybe checking in on the ones that are struggling more, but it gives everybody something to do, and is an active reason to want to be fluent because you're working with a peer. So students who do this well can then go home and do it with their parents. Once they have this strategy kind of as a routine, this is great for home learning because they can go and do this with any stories that are sent home or any books that they have, and they can do it back and forth with their parents. So next we have vocabulary. So vocabulary is the words we use while speaking and writing or understand when listening and reading. The speaking, writing, listening, and reading are very important aspects of this, and it is either taught directly or indirectly with cultural and semantic connotations. So, for example, a child that lives in the U.S. will be raised speaking English, but let's say we have a student who grew up in the UK, they also speak English, but their vocabulary will be different because of the culture and the semantic connotations that being in a different country provides. So for vocabulary, it's, for example, we have hearing the word dog and then being able to connect that concept in your brain with, the concept of the animal, and then also being able to read the word dog and also connecting it. So it's not just reading the word or just hearing it, it's both, and being able to connect and understand what it is. And vocabulary starts from birth. It has been noted that families that are in a lower economic status have their children hear less vocabulary words and less diverse words. So as an educator, it's very important that we are constantly introducing new words and constantly having new vocabulary within the classroom to make sure that all our students opportunity to hear that rich diversity of vocabulary. We want our students to be able to have all of this so that when we get into comprehension later on, they're not struggling with individual words, but with concepts. So for our first assessment, we have word recognition. This is an informal assessment, and within this one, the teacher will ask a student to read from a list of sight words, and they just mark how many correct they've gotten. I have an example here on the left. The teacher would hold up cards with each of these words, which I think is the most convenient, and then they just mark which ones they get right or wrong. And then the scores are compared against their previous correct answers. This can be put into a student's portfolio. And we want to monitor progress of this about 3 times a year during the school year, but for kindergarten and second grade. For our second assessment, this is a formal assessment. We have the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. In this one, the teacher will show a student a set of pictures and then ask them to describe what is happening. On the right, we have a sample of what that would look like. And the score depends on how many appropriate vocabulary words are used. So, for example, we could look at at image 1, in the top left corner, and some vocabulary words that the student could use are mother, child, baby, family, hug, things that have to do with the picture. And then within the test, it'll have a list of the appropriate vocabulary words. And then to monitor progress, there is a growth scale value and a normal curve equivalent that sets standards that you can set their scores against just to make sure that they're on track. For our third assessment, we have the expressive vocabulary test, which is a formal test. In this one, a teacher sits one-on-one with a student and asks verbal questions and then takes note of the vocabulary that they're using. This score is based on quality and quantity of vocabulary. So not only do they want to hear a lot of words from the student, but they want them to be higher level words. And then we monitor progress in this one with a new growth scale value that the test itself provides, which comes from data that they've collected that you can then use to compare the level that your students are at. For an evidence-based strategy, we have word projects. In this one, teachers can ask students to bring an item to the classroom, kind of like a show and tell, but we'd want the item to be from a set group. So, for example, cooking ingredients, job items, transportation devices. Students can share this item in the class, and they can share its name and maybe a couple of facts about it. Just developing vocabulary that all has to do with a single concept. So creating these internal connections. Teacher can discuss the different categories that the items can fit in, because sometimes they're overlapping, the reasons why certain items don't fit into certain categories, and then they can have the students even use the words in a sentence. A good way to tie this into home learning is that parents can help the kids pick out these items. You can do this weekly. And for example, like we have in the image, when you go shopping, you can point out the different words of fruits, of different vegetables, of different items that you see during the day. One thing that I would always recommend to the parents in my classroom was when they would be driving around with their child to point things out that they saw out the window. So, oh, that's a car. That's a type of vehicle or a type of transportation device. Oh, look, that's a bird. That's a type of animal. Just to continue to create these connections. Another evidence-based strategy includes a daily review. So for this one, like the example we have on the right, the teacher at the beginning of the day goes through the agenda and has a chart with all these different words about the different parts of the day, along with pictures to kind of help that connection. And then students repeat the day's agenda. And then at the end of the day, the teacher goes over it again, and this creates an opportunity for discussion, and you can ask individual students what they did that day. So, for example, you could say, oh, we ate at the beginning of the day. What's that called? Breakfast. Or if a student is, oh, I liked when we went outside, when we went to play, you can ask, oh, where did we go to play? And with the agenda there, even if they can't read the word, they can make that connection and say, oh, we went to play outside. A good way to incorporate this within home learning is just having parents ask their kids about their day. And what we can do is with summary packets sent home, the parents can see the kind of topics that we've been over that day. You can also send vocabulary lists home, not that the students need to memorize what each word means, but more so a general idea of the new words that are being used in the classroom so that they can repeat them at home. So for the third evidence-based strategy, we have morphology instruction. So morphology can really help students with the understanding of what a word means just from its prefix, its suffixes, or the root words that are involved in it. One example of a way that we can do morphology instruction is creating a chart with the four most common prefixes, un, re, in, dis, and then the students can brainstorm words that fall into those categories or use those, and then discuss their definitions. So we could have a root word like cast, and then if we add re to the beginning, recast, that means that it has been repeated, and that's how students can continue to expand their idea of how words could be tweaked, and this grows their vocabulary. So let's say they already know the word happy, then learning the prefix un, they can make unhappy. So that's a new word and a new skill that they have to decode vocabulary, which then also helps with comprehension. A good home learning strategy is sending a list of root words home and having students brainstorm new words with their parents. So now we're on to our final element, which is comprehension, and that is being able to gain meaning from text and then also being able to interpret what that text has provided. For example, this includes drawing on prior knowledge, so remembering what you'd learned before and being able to connect it to the text that has just been made available. And then drawing inferences, so taking that knowledge and making and garnering new ideas from it. This is a skill that you will work on during early elementary, and we really, really want them to have it down before they make it to middle and high school, because this is a skill that they'll be using forever. So for the first assessment, we have entry and exit slips. This is an informal assessment. With it, we have an example on the right-hand side. So for an entry slip, students fill out a slip with questions about the material that they're about to cover, and then teachers check the slips and compare to see if there's any specific things that the students are missing. To monitor progress with this, teachers can have, so we have the entry slip, which the student will do, and then the exit slip. You compare the correct answers between both, and that's how we can see what their score is, and then hopefully the whole class will have more correct answers after it, and that is how progress can be checked. This is also another item that can be put into a portfolio to see how much their comprehension has improved over time. For the second assessment, it is the informal reading inventory, also known as the qualitative reading inventory. This is an informal assessment. Within this one, the teacher picks a grade level appropriate text, and the students read it, and then when they are done, the teacher will ask explicit and implicit questions to check for understanding. So different grades get checked at different intervals to monitor progress with this one. So for kindergarten, this will be mid-year and end of year, and then it ramps up in first and second grade to 3 times a year with the beginning, middle, and end of the year to have assessments at that time. On the right, I have a chart of what your data that you collect from it would look like. So you see you have everybody's names, so you can see how each student is progressing, and then also how your class in general is progressing, just to make it a little easier to adjust for the entire classroom and to give you a solid idea of any weaknesses in the concepts that they may have, so that you can adjust your lessons accordingly. So for the third assessment, we have the listening comprehension test. This is a formal assessment, and within it, the teacher reads a set of phrases, and then to those phrases, the students provide responses on a worksheet. The worksheet is on the left. There's 5 subsets within the test, which is main ideas, details, reasoning, vocabulary, understanding messages, and then valid and reliable. So these phrases are things that students will hear typically within the classroom, and they have to garner not only what they mean, but responses to those phrases, or any implicit understanding they can garner from them. So when it comes to scoring, it's the amount correct that you get, and they have standard scores, percentile ranks, and age equivalents provided from the research done to produce a test that you can monitor progress against. So it's a lot of charts and it's a lot of direct data, which can be very useful, but also time-consuming. So our first evidence-based strategy is the ask and anchor method. So the teacher identifies words and concepts that are needed to understand the lesson, and then you can incorporate these into the lessons leading up to the main one. And then afterwards, students will examine a text together, the one that you've been leading up to, and then they can identify any words or concepts that they need more information on. They find this information and then they share it with their peers. This also looks like a think, pair, share activity, where you ask questions, then you group up with somebody to talk about the questions, try to find an answer, and then you share what you have found. So this is a great way to have group thinking incorporated, and also to be reflective about the information that we've just learned. One way to include this in home learning is to have the students pre-read the text for class and come in already with questions about concepts that they're unsure of. So our second evidence-based strategy is an anticipation guide. So this takes a little bit of pre-planning from the teacher, where they set up points that the students will learn within either a book or a lesson. On the right-hand side, we have an example with a lesson about living and non-living things. So in the before portion, this is where they mark which statement, whether they agree or disagree with the statement. As they're doing this, the teacher should model the thinking as they read through the questions. So plants need food to grow. You can say, in the lesson, what did we learn about plants? Do they need food to grow? What kind of food do they need to grow? So as you go through the lesson, you can go back to the anticipation guide to further emphasize those points. And since the students already have the vocabulary or those concepts in place, it's easier to transition to having conversations about them and leading to a stronger comprehension of the topics. To incorporate this into home learning, parents can ask similar anticipation questions before reading with their kids. And for example, you can do this with books by pointing out any characters that are on the cover and saying, oh, what do we think is going to happen in the book? Do you think these might be the main characters? Parents can also just flip through books and find some points that they think are interesting and have that be part of just a very informal, quick anticipation guide that they can do at home. So for the third evidence-based strategy, we have reciprocal teaching. This one is a little bit more complex. Within reciprocal teaching, students read and work through a text together, and within these groups, there are 4 strategies: predicting, clarifying, generating questions, and summarizing. Each of these will eventually turn into a role that each student can take when they are examining a text. It's best to start with the teacher modeling one of these strategies. So first everybody learns predicting, then everybody learns clarifying, so that eventually when the students know how to do each of these steps individually, when they come into their groups, they can be assigned a role without having to spend time explaining how to do each part or being confused about what each student needs to do. So students can work on the strategy within home learning, so they can take the text home, for example, and if they're doing the generating questions, they can prepare their questions at home so that when they get to the classroom and they rejoin their groups, they can jump straight into discussion. So thank you very much for joining me for this presentation. Below I have my bibliography. I'd like to give a special shout out to Reading Rockets. There was so much information there, and I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you very much.